Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Citation Group's Cybersecurity Risk Management Strategies for a Safer Digital Future. It's a very hot topic. We're just waiting for a few more people to join us. So grab your coffees and cups of tea and settle in. It's going to be a lot of information, a lot of understanding about cybersecurity and the framework for managing it. We're just going to wait another minute or so for a few more people to join, and then we'll kick off the presentation. Thanks again for joining us. Okay, we've got a few more people coming in. Welcome to those that have just joined to Citation Group's webinar on cybersecurity, risk management, and strategies for a safer digital future. We are going to begin now. Please remember that this is being recorded. So if for whatever reason you need to leave or you would like to share this with someone else in your team, a link will be made available. At the end of this presentation, we will have a question and answer section. So as we go along, please take notes, or you can simply just pop your question into the Q&A feature. Don't post it into the chat if possible. The Q&A is the best one to post those questions in. We'll be monitoring it, and we'll get to those questions at the end of the presentation today. Today, I'm joined by our good friend, Matthew Miller. Matt is the co-founder and director of Insicon. He works with organizations as well as many of Citation's clients with helping them with their cybersecurity strategies and compliance. So this is his bread and butter, deals with it every single day. And we thought he'd be the best one to talk us through all the ins and outs of what's going on in the current market. Okay, so before we begin, I'll just give you a bit of a background on who is Citation Group. So Citation started as a law firm, a specialist workplace law firm 31 years ago. It has now evolved into 5 pillars, all centered around compliance and software. So we have Citation Law, which is still going, specializing in workplace law and migration services. Off the back of that came Enable HR. This was a HR software system for companies that evolved into Citation HR, which is a HR software system. It also has an excellent advice line, 24 hours a day. You can ring up and speak with an HR specialist or lawyer about any HR-related queries or issues, and that is all part of the package. Citation then evolved into Citation Safety. Again, this is a software system that it can be a standalone package that specializes in all work health and safety compliance, documentations, making sure that you're compliant with current legislation, and that can be added onto Citation HR. And then there is Citation Certification, where we provide the independent assessments of companies' management systems and issue ISO certificates in line with the regulatory body in Australia. So a bit more about Citation Certification. We make certification simple. There are many ISO certificates that one can get. We also offer NDIS certification, and we do audits and training compliance. So some of the certificates you may be familiar with, there's 9001 that deals with quality. There's a certificate that works with environment, and another one around OH&S. When you combine those three, 9001, 14001, and 45001, it's called an IMS, or an integrated management system, that you might see on tender documents. But we also do asset management certification, food safety certification, and NDIS certification. And then, of course, ISO 27001, which is becoming increasingly popular which is Information Security Management System Certification, which provides an excellent framework to manage all things related to cybersecurity. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So today's agenda, Matt will be taking us through some real life examples of cybersecurity breaches and what went wrong, how to identify risks within your business, techniques and tools that can help minimize threats, and at the end, we'll have a bit of a Q&A session. So with that, I will hand it over to Matt Miller.
Thank you so much, Gavin, and thanks for having me here today. It looks like a great turnout too, so thanks everyone for joining us today. So who is Insicon? So Insicon, we're a cybersecurity leadership company, and we work with organizations and in a top-down approach. So we tend to work with boards and executives of these organizations so that we help to dimension their cyber risk and work out ways and strategies to remediate those risks. So it's more about working in partnership with our customers to make sure that they understand and continually go on the journey of improving their security posture and by diminishing their cyber risks. So cybersecurity, as Gavin said, it's something that I work with every day, and I work with customers on every day to make sure that we're really helping customers identify cyber risk in the cybersecurity landscape, which is ever changing. So, and obviously, there's been a lot of excitement in the news recently. So, and unfortunately, it's not all good. So, cybersecurity, we all hear about it on a day-to-day basis, and it's very unfortunate these large organisations are falling victim to these ever-increasing and sophisticated cyber attacks. So we've seen some big ones in the news lately. So if we go to the next slide, the one that I suppose has had the headlines recently is Ticketmaster, and Ticketmaster succumbed to a cyber breach that unfortunately half a billion account holder records were exfiltrated via Ticketmaster. So the hacking group, they've demanded a half a $1 million US price tag to give the data back, which, however, the data that was included was quite important data for the customers that are affected. And essentially it's a third-party attack. So third-party attacks are on the increase, and they're actually quite a vicious attack. Is that you have a lot of trust and expectations in your third-party supplier ecosystem, and it's through those third parties that hackers are exploiting that trust and those relationships to get access to these large amounts of data. And unfortunately, Ticketek Australia was also a target in this particular breach. So it's breaches like this that really do sort of set the scene for the importance of having a good third-party supplier review process and risk management process, which we can get into a little bit further down the track when we start to talk about ISO 27001. And the next one is Northern Minerals. So Northern Minerals, this is quite an interesting one where Northern Minerals, they fell victim to a phishing attack. And through that phishing attack, they were actually infected with a ransomware attack, which what that did was encrypt all the HR files within the organization. And it just shows that there's so much important information is kept within those HR files, including medical, travel, training, certification, all the really important personal details that HR systems and HR departments collect on their employees was unfortunately the target of this particular attack. So again, it just shows you how how important internal data is, and understanding what type of data that you hold within these systems, and make sure that you've got the right protections to avoid these types of attacks from happening. So if large organizations get breached like this, and they've obviously got deep pockets and they've got a large budget to protect their data, how should we go about protecting our environments from breaches like this? one thing that we always start with our customers is really understanding, doing a baseline and really working out what type of data that each organization holds and where they actually store that data. That's really, at the end of the day, what these hackers are trying to get access to or to encrypt. So making sure you understand where all your digital assets are, make sure that you understand the importance of them, and make sure that you've got the appropriate control that's commensurate to the importance of that data. I think that's, understanding your environment and just being aware of it allows you to make really good and educated decisions about how you go about protecting it. So, but in saying that also, every organization, to be operational and to be competitive, to be effective in the industry that it chooses, you do need some level of risk. If you're an e-commerce provider, for example, you're on the internet. So your level of risk is actually quite high in comparison to that, say, of a legal firm where it's more internal, it's more resource oriented. So it's all about understanding and weighing up that risk for the business model that your organization has. So accepting some of that risk, accepting some of that vulnerability, but making sure that you're always vigilant about measuring the threat and vulnerability is really important, and that will allow you to remain competitive, remain operational, and remain effective for not just your customers, but within your chosen market. So how do we identify and assess risk? There's two main factors that we always take into consideration when considering cyber risk. The first is the threat. A threat is an external exploitable threat actor. What is essentially the ability for a threat actor to be a motivated entity towards your environment or to gain access to your data? That in comparison or that in complement with a vulnerability that you have within your environment allows us to determine the size of the risk. There's obviously other aspects to it, such as likelihood and impact and a raft of other type of metrics that go along with it. But ultimately, if you combine the threat, which is an external entity, and a vulnerability, which is an internal weakness, that will determine the size of risk that you hold within your environment. So keeping a good eye on either one of those metrics is really important to continually, not just to monitor, to dimension your risk, but also to mitigate and remediate those risks, both in the short term and the longer term. So one thing that I always like to bring it back to is our analogies, and one that I'm personally going through at the moment, and I'm sure that I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that are going through similar or have been through similar things. Is I'm currently teaching my daughter how to drive, and if you look at it, if you break this down into like a real life example, is the threats that I come across every day when I'm teaching my daughter how to drive is that the threats are other drivers on the road. There's pedestrians, there's cyclists, there's animals, there's a whole raft of different types of issues or threats that, we come across every day. But, in isolation, they may not be too concerning. If we see a pedestrian and we're a pedestrian ourselves, we'd probably say hello and shake hands. But when you're in a car, that pedestrian could pose themselves as a threat. So especially if the weather's bad or it's raining and windy or the visibility is low, that pedestrian is highly likely to be hit by my daughter if they're not careful. So and look, all that is just to go and buy a loaf of bread. So there's a lot of threats out there when you're teaching young people how to drive, and that's not so much to do with each of those different variables. There's also other factors involved here, which is experience, the ability to predict things, to see situations. That situational awareness is really important, and that's no different to when you're owning your own business or you're running a business. You need to be situationally aware of the threats that that are posed to your business, and that could be quite simply someone clicking on a link. So if you are not training your employees to look for those particular threats, the threat increases, because the vulnerability in this case is being able to understand the road rules. Being new to the road rules is really important in this particular analogy. So if you've got the threat and you don't understand the road rules, the risk starts to increase, especially when there's so many variables that we experience every day when we're out there teaching our children how to drive a car, and that's not dissimilar to running your own business or managing cyber risk that we see there pretty much every day. So, but obviously the risk decreases once you have more experience and awareness and transparency to the threat and the vulnerability. We can manage the risk, and we can manage that with different types of tooling and different types of awareness, so that we can decrease the risk over time. And understanding, so this is a very, I'm sure that a lot of people have seen this from a risk matrix perspective, is like just determining what the risk is, and dimensioning the risk comes down to likelihood versus impact. So the very simple gauge for us to look at and to compare these particular axes against a cyber risk. And this just gives us a really quick and very visual way to determine a cyber risk and its impact, and make sure that we take it as seriously as it's calibrated, and we also have the right controls in place to mitigate, or in many cases to accept the risk. If it's too big or it's too small, we could actually quite happily accept the risk and make sure it's noted and move on. So, and that's what risk assessments and risk methodologies are all about. So if I was to do a risk assessment again of my daughter learning how to drive, scenario one, hitting a pedestrian. So the probability in my daughter's case is it's possible. It's the impact is unfortunately catastrophic. So therefore, the risk in this case would be high, because we're combining all of the scenarios together. And unfortunately, in this case, the risk would be high. Hitting another car in scenario number two, the probability, again, it's very likely. The impact would be major. And again, the risk would be high. And scenario number three, speeding, the probability, trust me, it is absolutely likely. And the impact is moderate, but the risk is medium. There's obviously going to be a penalty associated to that. But if you look at all those three in isolation, you can quite easily determine the risk for each of those different scenarios. There's also the concept of aggregate risk. So to be able to combine scenario three with scenario two, which in effect could end up being, could lead into scenario one. So being able to understand each of these risks in isolation, but if they were to be combined, also creates a different risk model or a different risk profile, which is not too dissimilar to what happens in cybersecurity. So being able to determine each of these risks in their own right, but also to have a concept of aggregate risk is really important, which then flows into residual risk and in a number of different ways that we look at cyber risk in its life cycle. So how do we moderate risk? So firstly, we introduce controls. So we bring in this case, the learner driver logbook. So we document, we make sure that we understand our competencies, or in many cases, our lack of competency. We don't know how to treat a risk. And then we bring in certain things such as an external test. So, my daughter's not going to go directly from, learning how to drive to getting a license. She actually has to go through a provisional test and prove that she's competent. It's not too dissimilar to what we see in cybersecurity now, with all the new frameworks and best practices that the Australian government and many other governments around the world are asking organisations to do and to prove, to make sure that they're showing reasonable steps and competency to be able to treat their cyber risk. And then we introduce rules. So if you're not competent and you're not keeping up your cyber hygienes and your cybersecurity posture, there is legislation now that that you will be penalised if you can't show that in a particular incident or a compromise. So again, like there's a lot of parallels that we can draw between teaching my daughter how to drive and really being competent from a cybersecurity perspective. There are each of these particular attributes within cybersecurity now that and frameworks and best practices have long been spoken about, but only more recently being adopted. And that's one thing that we pride ourselves on at Insicon, is that we are helping our customers implement best practice frameworks like ISO 27001 to be able to better educate and to also solidify cyber risk practices within these organizations, whether they're large or small. So how do we assess and identify organizational risk? And I think that's it's a question that most people ask, is that I just don't understand all of them. I understand, you know, antivirus, and I understand ransomware, and I understand a few of these particular risks, but what do they mean to me, and how do I identify them? Again, if you bring it back to simple, you know, making sure that your environment is as less complex as you can make it, as simple as you can make it, will help you identify those risks a lot more easily than if the environment's complex. Starting with your people and starting with your organization controls, that will help you identify your risks very quickly. Typically, risk resides within the employees and being able to respond to a cyber threat. Once you transgress those particular attributes, going into more understanding your technical environment and technical competencies allows you to sort of delve deeper into your threats, your vulnerabilities, which then obviously determines your risk. So there is a process that we take, and there's a methodology that we take to identify risk, and we tend to go through simple through to complex to identify those risks, and also to determine how impactful those risks could be to an organization. So everyone has risk, everyone has cyber risk. Anyone who's got a computer has cyber risk. Being able to identify them and respond accordingly is the difference between you and the next person. So the different types of threats and risks that we see out there now, and they do change. They change every day. They get more sophisticated as time goes on. And you know, I hate to say this word, but it's unprecedented, the amount of cyber risks that we're seeing out there and the amount of people that are falling victim to these particular cyber threats. But the threat realistically is it's the source of the exploit. It typically is it's a motivated threat actor, and a motivated threat actor is someone who has something to gain from exploiting a vulnerability. The fallacy here is that it typically is an external party. And typically, a lot of the time it is, but it's also from within as well. So that's one thing that we should never overlook, is that external and internal threat actors do exist. And being able to exploit a corporate asset or to gain benefit from doing that is essentially what a motivated threat actor looks like. Sometimes that can happen by accident, and sometimes it can happen by ignorance. So not always is it a malicious attack. It can just happen by overlooking a certain control. A lot of them are like we've spoken about earlier with Ticketmaster, is that third-party supplier attacks are on the increase, and having a good and solid third-party risk assessment process in place is absolutely critical at the moment, because you are not in control of the security controls within your third-party partners, suppliers, and customers, and also making sure that your staff are well educated and well entrenched in cyber understanding, so that because they effectively are the first and last line of defence when it comes to cyber defence. Now, the types of threats that we're seeing out there, so high volume. So we're seeing like small scale scams, like, text messages. We all get the 3 a.m. Text message about, your package hasn't been delivered, or you need to pay your e-tag, or whatever it is. But then we also see large scale targeted attacks, like with Ticketmaster and others that we've seen out there recently, where ransomware and extortion really are about not only extorting money, but also it can be a publicity stunt, it can be reputational damage, it could be a whole raft of different attacks with risk associated with each of those attacks. And these can be delivered in a magnitude of different ways. And these are changing all day. They're changing every single day. So we've seen the traditional ones with email and SMS. We get those all day. We're starting to see the increase in malicious websites and embedded code. But the ones that I'm starting to get worried about is more social media, is that we don't tend to think about our employees' social media accounts. We more lock down our corporate media accounts. So talking to your employees about their social media and not giving away too much information about your organization is becoming more of a topical, more of a topic that we talk to customers about on a daily basis. But the one that we're seeing that it's very damaging is the increase in AI, in deep fake type attacks. And we've seen some really damaging attacks recently, where AI and deep fake attacks have convinced and defrauded organisations out of many millions of dollars by using impersonation attacks and other very, very highly sophisticated attacks that I still think that we're not really prepared to take on just yet. We're still getting used to understanding, or we're getting to understand what these attacks are and how they're being used against us. So, and hackers, like I said, aren't always the problem. So hackers outside of organizations aren't always the problem. It's actually Colin from accounts. So, Colin wants to make a good impression, and he wants to do his job the best he possibly can. So, Colin's motivated to click on a link and to be helpful, or to be seen to be helpful. Unfortunately, that link that Colin just clicked on was a phishing campaign, and a phishing link that unfortunately exploited his account and ended up in a ransomware situation. So hackers aren't always the problem. There's a lot of bots out there. There's a lot of ransomware as a service. Which is highly lucrative for those organizations that do these types of attacks. Educating your employees not to click on those links and making sure that they're cyber aware is absolutely critical, because Colin has just tried to do the best that he possibly can, to get the promotion or to look good in front of his organization, whereas in fact he's clicked on a link that ended up in a ransomware event. So Colin's good nature, obviously, being, to click on that link, to make sure that he's seen to be doing the right thing. And you can see this, the numbers are stacked against Colin. So there's 3.4 billion spam emails sent every day, whereas Google blocks around 100 million phishing emails daily. So unfortunately, Colin really is up against it, especially when you've got regimes such as Russia sending a lot of these phishing attacks, having over a fifth of the phishing emails originating from Russia. There's many other regimes out there that do send these types of attacks. So training people like Colin in accounts and making sure that everyone is cyber aware really does go a long way to preventing these types of attacks from being exploited within organizations. And realistically, it's the impact that clicking these links and falling or succumbing to these particular phishing campaigns is actually really damaging, and it's we see it many times over and over again. So it's definitely something to keep an eye out on. So my data's in the cloud, so that's safe, right? Well, no. One of the director obligations is understanding where your data is and being able to recover from a cyber incident if it happens. So if your data is in the cloud, it's not always considered safe. It is exploitable, and having security controls to protect that data is imperative no matter where it is. So understanding where your data is, understanding the applications that are connected to it, and understanding the user access is absolutely critical to protect the data from no matter where it resides. So cloud is not always seen as a safe place. It's just as insecure as anywhere else, and that's the way that you should always approach cloud solutions, is that it's your data, it's your responsibility. So enough of me being doom and gloom. So what can we do about this? So some strategies about reducing your cyber risk and building a culture of cyber awareness and empowerment. So going and documenting your cyber risk is really important. And that's what something such as the Information Security Management System, or the ISMS, allows you to do. It's a programmatic and best practice way to both identify risk, but also treat risk over time. You can't treat something that you don't know about, and that's what an ISMS allows you to do. So essentially, it's creating your own organization's version of a learner's logbook, and you get better over time. The more that you put into that logbook, the better you become at handling that risk. And that then allows you to road test your cyber risk as well, being able to learn from it, get better at it, practice it. And it really does then demonstrate your cyber competency as you go through that, especially if you start to reduce your risk, mitigate it, or accept it. So, and that's where we see ISO 27001 as being the best certification that is on offer. One, it allows us to look at cyber risk. It's not entirely technical. It looks at the organization holistically, and it really does empower organizations to take their cybersecurity a lot more seriously in an inherent manner. So in saying that, though, one thing that I just wanted to express to everyone. So firstly, thank you everyone for joining us today on this webinar. And I just wanted to offer on behalf of Insicon 5 discounted risk assessments. So at least that you guys can understand what the process is of a risk assessment, and hopefully it's a methodology and a practice that you can implement across your business. And you can sort of see and you can go on the journey and hopefully learn from that process. And I do enjoy teaching people, especially my daughter, how to drive. So if I can impart on up to 5 organizations out there on how to go through a risk assessment, that'd be ideal, and hopefully we can learn together.
Thank you, Matt. That's an excellent offer. Citation have also got an offer going for new clients. So get up to 20% off ISO certification. It's very, very rare that we discount our services, but we do have an end of financial year offer going. Please scan that QR code on the right. You'll go into a draw to win a $500 e-gift card. Second place gets $250. Good chance you might win. But the offer is 5% off on 1 ISO certificate, 10% on 2, 15% on 3 ISO certificates, and 20% off on 4 ISO certificates. By combining multiple certifications, it's also known as an integrated management system. There is a bit of overlap in some of the standards, so you'll be saving a bit of time by doing them together. You also get it becomes quicker for us to audit and assess your management system when it's combined. So there's a saving there. And it also is less disruptive to your business because you have all certificates assessed at the same time each year. So now is a good time to take advantage of that and get some good savings on your certification. And I'll just give you a bit more time to scan in that QR code, and you can enter in the details now. and get in touch with us. We can have a longer discussion about your needs and what's involved, and give you a good idea of the timeline and exactly what the certification process will look like for you. And of course, you'll go into that draw to win an e-gift card. Okay, so that should have given you enough time to scan that QR code. I'll now go into the journey to ISO 27001 and what that looks like. So just to give you a bit of background, who we are, citation certification is what's called a CAB, or a conformity assessment body. We are accredited by JAS ANZ, or JASHANS, as a independent assessment body. So JASHANS is the regulatory body in Australia, and that stands for the Joint Accreditation System of Australia and New Zealand. JASHANS is also a part of the IAF, which is the International Accreditation Forum. Basically, what it means for you is when you get certified by citation, you get registered with JASHANS. You get a JASHANS logo on your certificate. Your business also gets registered on the JASHANS portal that any government department or company can look you up for added due diligence. And as JASHANS is part of the globally accepted forum, your management system is then recognized globally. So we provide the independent assessment in line with JASHANS requirements. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so in addition, we are under a very strict deed poll arrangement with JAS ANZ. This has aspects that deal with how we deal with companies, around our own compliance, around confidentiality. It's strict and legally binding. We adhere to very formal requirements around the JA manual, around the standards themselves that we have to align to, as well as the IAF mandatory docs. This also reflects on our assessors. We take a lot of pride in our assessors that will come and meet with you and go through your management system and assess you for certification. They have to be very experienced, which they are. They'll be very experienced within your industry and your industry code. They're also qualified, not only with tertiary education, but they also are qualified to audit in particular industries and for particular standards. So they give you a lot of good perspective on your management system, and they really understand the industries that they're certifying. We'll go to the next slide. So what is ISO certification? It's a process by which we assess your management system. So the JASHANS definition is saying having goods and services certified or inspected for quality assurance to meet specified standard, which gives organizations a competitive edge. The ISO International Organization says it's a useful tool to add credibility and demonstrating that your products or service meet expectations of your customers. For some industries, certification is legal and contractual, or a contractual requirement. We absolutely see that in Australia. Most government, council, tier 1 mining contracts, anyone who wants to provide a good or service will need to be ISO certified. You're basically telling the market, as well as these clients of yours, that you adhere to these standards, you have processes in place, you're aware of risk and your obligations, you have a way of managing your processes to ensure the same high level of outcome in product or service time and time again. You've been independently assessed by us and approved by JASHANS. It's basically the highest level of certification you can get in Australia. Next slide, please. So current clients that we certify, and the main reasons for that, especially in regards to ISO 27001. These are clients that handle sensitive information, have shared networks and databases, especially with government databases or integrated business-to-business networks, clients that collect or store customer data, businesses that have a large workforce and collect or store employees' personal information, will generally go for 27001, and especially dealing with government contracts or for tender requirements. A lot of the time, the tender documents will specify that it needs to be a JASANS approved ISO 27001 certificate. And then again, any company that wants to adhere to or claim that that their information security and data privacy process meets a recognized framework and that it's been independently assessed and approved by a governing body. That's the main reasons that organizations want to get certified. Okay. What's the certification process like? So only in the first year are there 2 stages. So year 1 is a stage 1 assessment. This is a document review. The assessor will go through your policies, your procedures, and then issue a report which shows you what's missing or what needs to be improved, if any, before you move to a stage 2. The longest gap between a stage 1 and stage 2 is 6 months. So there's plenty of time to make changes and get ready. Stage 2 is your compliance assessment. That is, once you comply, is when you get certified at the end of that stage 2. And then that certificate is valid for 3 years with the requirement that we assess your management system each year. So year 2 is an annual assessment and year 3 is an annual assessment. Then the certification rolls over for recertification. No more stage 1 and 2, just a recertification assessment. Why is it treated separately? Is because for recertification, we need to look at your business. Has the scope of your business changed? Are you offering any different services? Has the company grown? Has there been any acquisitions? And has your workforce grown? A number of factors that need to be considered for recertification. But once initial certification is done and you want to hold certification, you'll have an annual assessment done each year. Okay, next slide. So what are the benefits of ISO certification? So I think a lot that Matt has mentioned, but your systems are continually reviewed and maintained. ISO framework works on continual improvement. So not only are you looking and improving your management system internally, but you're also getting an independent assessment through our assessors each year on your management system, which can help to look for any gaps of areas of improvement. It's a certificate you can market, put on your website, stick it up on your wall. A lot of customers or clients of ours that are certified will have marketing stickers printed on their vehicles or uniforms. It shows your customers and your partners that you adhere to high level standards, and that you're a safe bet when dealing with, and you've been independently verified that what you say you do, and you do it well. It's a big barrier to entry, so it's a good way to get ahead of your competitors. There's obviously a lot of effort put into getting certified, putting in the frameworks, training staff members. You might find a lot of the stuff you're doing already. It's just about putting it into one management system and looking at making additions to get certified. Absolutely, you win more tenders with it. A lot of shortlists will come down to those that have it and those that don't. And as I mentioned before, most government departments or tier 1 companies will have a requirement for ISO certification. Yes, the independent audits, serve 2 functions. The assessor will look at how your management system aligns to the standard, and B, look at areas of improvement. So they'll constantly challenge you and look at ways of improving your management system year on year. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our presentation. Once again, Matt, thank you very much for joining us. Before we let you go, though, we do have some questions and that have come through. So we'll take a few questions now. We don't have a time to cover them all, but there's a few that stand out here. This might be a good one for you to answer, Matt. Our organization is small. Is it too small to be targeted for cyber breaches?
No, no one's too small. I know my parents at home get targeted with cyber breaches, and I know they've fallen victim to a few scams. So there's no such thing as too small, and it's all relative. The smaller you are, the bigger the impact it will be. So being cyber aware is absolutely critical to all organisations, small to large. And again, cyber risk is relative to all organizations.
Yeah, okay. So there's another question here. Our organization doesn't hold any financial or personal data. Does that mean we won't be a target?
No. There's a lot of organizations out there that don't hold sensitive data, but it's clearly important to you. So ransomware is all about taking away the privilege of having access to that data. So with the intent that you're going to pay to get it back. So that is what a ransomware is all about. But also the reputational risk that comes with that is that all customers are all organizations are the custodians of data. They're not the owner of data. So you're there to handle the data in the most secure manner. So if you're not showing your customers and your partners that you're doing that in a secure manner, there is a reputational risk associated with that. So again, it's all relative, and it doesn't really matter what type of data it is. You need to handle it with the utmost care, and it's relative to your organization, but also to your customers. Obviously, the more sensitive the data is, the more that it's more aligned with personal identifiable data, the more control that you should have on it. But again, it's all relative to your business and to your customers.
And I remember you explained to me recently that any data collected will form a piece of a bigger puzzle by these hackers. So you might think it's not relevant, but that might be a missing piece of a puzzle for someone's information that they need, or certain information they need to then form another attack, or to use that data in some sort of fraudulent transaction.
Yeah. That's correct. And I think, we're seeing a lot of these different types of attacks happening to many different organizations in different verticals. And our prediction is that those data sets are being used to cross-validate and cross-reference each other, so that the data sets that the hackers have is a lot more valid, a lot more usable for impersonation attacks. So again, someone may call you and they may not be who they seem to be, because they've got more information on you than you think they do. So it's becoming a bit of a sad world when we have to think like that, but it's just reality that we need to always stay vigilant and make sure that we're not falling victim to these attacks, no matter how real they seem.
Okay. Okay, we've got time for a few more. How long does it take to become compliant? I mean, I've gone through that a bit from my end in terms of the stages of certification, but in your experience when working with companies to get them ready, what's the timelines that you seem to see?
It depends, again, on the size of the organization and their complexity, but we tend to see between 6 to 12 months is the average. That sort of 9 to 12 months is probably the typical. But the smaller the business and the less complex they are, the quicker we can work with those customers. But I just want one thing I want to impress on everyone is that 27001, it's an undertaking. It's a big undertaking. It's a serious standard. It's a lot more complex or sophisticated than, say, 9001. But in saying that, the benefits that you get from being certified in 27001 are very much commensurate to the effort that's put in.
Definitely. I've seen out of all the ISO standards, 27001 does have the most amount of controls, but it's a very robust framework, and it's like that for a reason. Okay, so we had another question here. Where should we start, and is it expensive? So I can tell you from Citation's point of view, the best starting point is to have a chat with us. We'll give you a better idea of the process, help you formulate a timeline. We can share with you some gap analysis checklists that you can look at. In terms of cost, every company is different. We have to look at a number of factors in accordance with Just Hands to determine your audit durations, and that determines the cost of certification. So it's best we have a chat and get some information. We look at your industry, the type of software you're using, the type of business, the scope of your business, number of employees, number of offices, sites. There's a number of factors that go into determining the cost of the ISO 27001 certification. Matt, what about from your side?
Yeah, I think it's one thing that we always start with is having the customer answer the why question. Why do you want ISO 27001? Is there a compelling reason for it? And once we sort of determine the why and whether they're serious about and committed to the journey, understanding their statement of applicability then becomes a thing where we can then determine the effort that's required based upon that statement of applicability, and ultimately the cost that's associated to it. And we've never seen two ISO implementations the same, or ISO 27001 implementations the same. So, but again, it all comes back to that first question of why do you want to do ISO 27001? We've had many customers that have said that they just want to do it to show shareholders and customers that they're taking cybersecurity seriously. We've had others do it because they see it as being competitive, and if they don't do it, they're going to lose business. And we've seen some others that do store sensitive data, and it's becoming a regulation, or it's becoming an obligation for them to stay in business. So everyone's different, and the costs associated are all based upon each of those different requirements.
Thank you. This is a really good one. What will this mean to my business, and will it disrupt it?
And this goes back to the why question. Why do you want to do it? And look, there is a bit of overhead. It's hard not to implement a standard of this stature without it being a little bit without some extra overhead internally. But is it disruptive? I don't see it as disruptive. I actually see it as being implementing efficiencies within the organisation to make sure that the organisation runs better. And you actually gain benefits from implementing ISO through these efficiencies. So everyone that we've implemented to date, everyone's come back and really stated that the benefits definitely outweigh the overhead. Which is great to see, and it's also good to see that Australian organisations are taking cybersecurity more seriously, but also gaining the benefits of a standard at the same time.
Okay. What's the overhead on my business? We don't have anyone who looks after security all the time.
Yeah. So having dedicated cybersecurity people is really a luxury for the majority of organizations out there. So one thing that we see with the ISO standard, or the ISO 27001 standard, it has it's adaptable to organizations of all sizes. As long as there's a role and there's roles and responsibilities, and ultimately accountabilities within people's job descriptions, allows us to work with organizations to implement ISO 27001. once we, unfortunately, if we don't see people who are cyber, focused, it's very hard to work with organizations. But, having spoken about some of the cyber threats that we've seen out there, everyone's very cyber aware at the moment, or cyber oriented. So that we don't see as a big issue out there in our customer base. So yeah, look, as long as there's some level of cyber awareness, we can definitely work with that and help organizations obtain ISO 27001.
Excellent. Okay, so I've been told we just have time for one more. What guarantees of security does being certified give us?
More than without it. So, look, there's no guarantees in life, but having ISO 27001 certification makes you stand out against everyone else that doesn't have it. So you're more likely to avoid a cyber incident with aligning with the best practice such as ISO 27001. And look, it's not the only certification out there. There's many others, but it's an international standard, and we see it as the most comprehensive standard that you can implement to stop these types of threats. If you are a target and that threat actor is very much motivated to compromise you, it's very hard to stop that from happening. But at least with a standard like ISO 27001, it's a framework that will not just help detect and prevent these types of threats, but also recover if you ever fall victim to it. So it's an all of business standard that allows you to not only detect, prevent, but to recover from a cyber event if that were to ever eventuate.
Very good. Thank you, Matt. I'm sorry we don't have time for any other questions, but please feel free to reach out to either myself or Matt, LinkedIn, email. We'll be happy to have a chat with you and go through anything that we might have missed or you're not sure on. But Matt, thank you very much for your time and attending. I know our citation clients will appreciate your insights. And yes, have a good day.
Thank you, Gavin.
No worries.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.